Welcome to Posh Deep Dive, a series that goes beneath the surface of India's prevention of sexual harassment law. In every episode, we explore the real meaning behind the act. Come, let's listen to one story, one deep dive at a time.
When you think about workplace culture, boundaries are usually front and center. But what happens when the cultural norm is getting close and the corporate rule is keep your distance? We're diving into a really fascinating area today. How these deeply ingrained cultural habits around physical closeness, like you see in India, create this immediate, almost palpable friction when they meet, the modern, much more gender-diverse professional world.
Right. That tension is pretty much the core of what we're looking at. Today, we're digging into sources that focus specifically on defining personal space, managing those, let's say, traditional social dynamics, which, often include a history of male dominance.
Sure.
And making sure businesses are actually fully complying with Indian workplace safety law. The mission really is to understand how personal space shifts from just being like a social preference to a legally required thing.
Okay, so before we really unpack that clash, let's just make sure we're all on the same page with the two sort of legal ideas governing this. For you, the listener, we're not just talking manners here.
No, not at all.
Personal space in this context has to be seen as that legally required physical zone someone needs to feel genuinely secure. Protected, really, from what could become a hostile work environment. It's a fundamental safety.
And that safety piece connects directly to POSH, that's the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act from 2013. The sources are super clear on this. POSH is the legal foundation here.
Right.
Any unwanted or, unnecessary intrusion into that required personal space, it immediately risks violating the act. So the question isn't if personal space matters anymore. It's more about how do you define it? How do you enforce it when the surrounding culture often kind of encourages the opposite?
Okay, let's get into that. Specifically, let's look at that central cultural conflict that makes drawing these lines just so tricky for companies operating there.
Yeah, what's really interesting, and the sources bring this up again and again, is that India functions largely as a high-context culture.
High context. Explain that a bit.
Well, it means a huge amount of communication isn't just words. It relies on shared history, subtle body language, nonverbal cues, stuff that's understood without being explicitly stated.
Okay, got it.
Now, compare that to, say, a typical American or maybe European corporate setting, which is usually low context, much more about explicit rules, written policies, very clear verbal instructions.
Right. Everything's spelled out.
Exactly. So you can immediately see the potential clash, can't you?
Yeah, you're basically trying to overlay this very structured low-context compliance thing, like everyone stay X feet apart, onto a culture where getting closer often signals trust or shared understanding, maybe even respect for hierarchy.
Clearly.
That sounds like, well, a recipe for confusion, maybe even pushback. I mean, if being physically close is usually a positive sign in social life, how does an employer enforce distance without making people feel, cold or overly formal?
That is the essential challenge. Physical closeness carries this powerful double meaning. Socially? Yeah, absolutely. It can be a sign of warmth, familiarity, kinship. But shift that into a professional setting, especially one with clear hierarchies. And that same proximity can suddenly feel very different. It might feel intrusive, maybe intimidating, or even like a subtle power play. And that's just not okay in a professional environment, especially now with a more mixed workforce, right?
Absolutely.
So the sources really stress that being crystal clear about physical boundaries isn't just nice to have anymore. It's actually the main way to cut through that ambiguity and stop those misunderstandings that could, lead to legal trouble.
Which puts the burden squarely on the legal framework then to provide the clarity that the culture maybe doesn't inherently offer in the specific context.
Yes.
And that brings us neatly to the formal structure, the law itself.
Exactly. The law has basically had to step in to replace that cultural ambiguity with, explicit rules. Now, the POSH Act of 2013 is definitely the key piece of legislation here. It defines unwanted physical contact clearly as sexual harassment, a legal offense, but its origins, its roots actually go back further than 2013.
Right, and this is where that historical context really matters, isn't it? The POSH Act didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was formalizing standards that have been pushed for, demanded really, through court actions for years. It builds on major precedents like the landmark Vishaka Guidelines that came out of the Supreme Court back in the late 90s.
Yeah, the Vishaka Guidelines were truly groundbreaking at the time. They didn't just suggest better behavior. They They legally required organizations to take responsibility.
Okay.
Crucially, they mandated that every organization, public or private, had to set up what's called an Internal Complaints Committee, or ICC.
Ah, the ICC.
So this means that even before the 2013 Act, the structure was being put in place. The legal system was already saying, look, you must have internal ways to handle workplace misconduct, and that absolutely includes issues stemming from, inappropriate physical contact or boundary crossing.
So this whole context proves that dealing with personal space isn't some new HR trend or imported idea. It's been a legally recognized requirement for ensuring employee safety and professional conduct for decades now.
Absolutely. It's a long-term commitment.
Okay, so the law is pretty clear, or at least getting clearer. But as often happens, the behavior on the ground, the day-to-day stuff, can lag behind. And that gap between legal compliance and just sort of ingrained cultural habits, that leads us right into the practical, everyday challenges. These inadvertent violations, the sources talk about the ones that happen all the time, especially in crowded offices.
Right. And the tricky part with these personal space violations is that often they're not malicious. Nobody intends to make someone uncomfortable, usually.
Yeah, this seems likely.
They often come from just habit, or crowded elevators, packed meeting rooms, and that high context cultural comfort we talked about, being okay with less physical distance generally. But as we said, under POSH, it's the impact of the action that matters most, not necessarily the intention behind it.
We should probably paint a picture for the listener. What kind of simple, seemingly trivial actions are we talking about here? The ones that, if they happen over and over, really start to undermine someone's feeling of security.
Yeah, the sources give some great, very concrete examples. Things that feel tiny in isolation, but really build up. Like imagine a colleague reaching right over your shoulder, maybe into your immediate space to point at something on your screen or grab a file off your desk.
Oh yeah, I can picture that. Very common in open plan offices.
Super common. Or just the routine, unavoidable bumping that happens when you're trying to squeeze past desks in a narrow aisle, or get into a crowded lift, or navigate a busy canteen. Even just standing a bit too close when you're having a one-on-one conversation. Unintentionally invading that little bubble of space that makes the other person feel maybe a bit cornered or just uncomfortable.
And I guess even unintentional physical contact during team building activities or something?
That too, yeah. Things that are meant to be collaborative but can cross lines if not managed well.
So the combined effect of all these little things, you could almost call them like microaggressions of proximity that must actually be pretty significant over time.
Oh, it absolutely is. One accidental nudge might be nothing, easily ignored. But if you're experiencing multiple intrusions into your space every day, day after day, maybe especially from people senior to you.
Right, the power dynamic.
Exactly. It completely changes the feel of the workplace. It stops being about isolated accidents and starts feeling like a systemic, maybe unconscious lack of respect for professional boundaries. Yeah. It is that compounding effect, that buildup, that can transform what seems like minor discomfort into what the POSH Act would potentially see as a hostile work environment.
That makes total sense. Okay, so that's the problem. What does this all mean for actually running things day to day? Since, relying on culture alone isn't cutting it for compliance, we obviously need clear, actively managed systems.
Yeah.
And that means defined roles, right? For both the employer and the employees?
Yes, absolutely. And that critical responsibility really starts with the employer. They have to be the ones actively managing not just the rules, but the actual physical and psychological safety zone.
So not just writing a policy.
Definitely not just writing a policy.
Yeah.
Defining and communicating what's acceptable personal space is step one, sure, but then they have to enforce it. And crucially, they need to think about physical space planning.
Like the office layout itself.
Exactly. Maybe reviewing how desks are arranged. Are the aisles wide enough? Can you deliberately stagger desks or use partitions to prevent that constant shoulder-to-shoulder feeling? It's about designing the space to support the policy.
And the training aspect must be huge, too. We're moving way beyond just having people click through a PowerPoint about the policy, right? How should companies actually train staff to handle these really nuanced everyday situations?
The training needs to be much more dynamic, probably scenario-based. Role-playing could be incredibly effective here, actually.
Okay.
You need to equip managers and employees, too, with the language and the confidence to politely but firmly assert boundaries without causing offense, especially in that high-context culture where directness can sometimes be tricky.
So giving people actual words to use.
Yeah, like giving employees specific practiced phrases. Something like, "Excuse me, I just need a little more room to focus here," or "Could we perhaps discuss this with a bit more space between us?" Instead of just leaving them to awkwardly figure out how to handle it in the moment, which often means they just don't.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about accountability? How do employers know if it's working? Because if the main issue is lots of small, maybe unreported violations, just waiting for a formal POSH complaint seems,
Right.
well, too late.
Totally too late. They need proactive ways to measure this. Success shouldn't just be the absence of complaints. It should be measured by things like anonymous employee surveys that ask specifically about comfort levels in shared spaces or during interactions with managers.
Getting feedback directly.
Yes, and fostering that kind of culture where people do feel safe raising concerns, even minor ones about space, without fearing any kind of backlash. If you have a system that's genuinely proactive and encourages open discussion, you significantly reduce the chance of that built-up discomfort turning into a major issue or a formal complaint down the line.
Right. Okay, so that's the employer side. Now, let's flip it. Employees obviously have a role here, too. It's not just about following the rules passively, is it? They need to be active participants in maintaining this safe space.
Exactly. Employees definitely need to respect and, really internalize the guidelines the company sets out. That's baseline. But just as importantly, they need to be empowered and, yes, trained to communicate their own boundaries clearly and assertively when needed.
Which, as you said, can be really tough in hierarchical cultures. Challenging someone senior, even just about how close they're standing, can feel like a career risk sometimes.
It absolutely can, which is why organizations have to explicitly back them up. They need to make it clear that it is okay, in fact, it's expected, for employees to assert their need for appropriate personal space.
And alongside that assertive communication, employees also need to actually use the official channels when things feel wrong, right? Like that internal complaints committee we talk about, or HR address concerns before they fester. Use the system that's there. Ultimately, maintaining respectful personal space is a shared responsibility. It applies everywhere in your cubicle, in meeting rooms, the break room, everywhere.
At the end of the day, how an organization adapts its practices around personal space is probably one of the clearest indicators of whether it's truly serious about professionalism and legal compliance. As workplaces become more diverse, respecting physical distance isn't optional. It's the fundamental way to ensure every single employee, regardless of their gender or position, feels secure, respected, and able to do their best work.
That really ties it all together. So the final takeaway for you, our listener, today is this. Respecting personal space in a professional Indian context. It's not about trying to impose some kind of, Western formality.
At all.
It's actually a non-negotiable part of legal POSH compliance. And it requires consciously overriding those traditional cultural comfort zones the minute you step into the workplace. It's a fundamental shift from thinking about social closeness to thinking about professional safety.
Right. And the sources do mention that, talking about this regularly is really important. So building on that, here's something for you to think about regarding your own organization, perhaps. Given this inherent tension we've discussed between those high-context cultural norms and the low-context legal demands, how often should companies really revisit things, not just their official POSH policies or the annual training, but also like the physical design of their workspace and those subtle unwritten cultural rules about proximity? How often do they need to check if they're proactively addressing these nuances of space rather than just reacting when a formal line gets crossed? That's maybe something to mull over.